My own son looked me in the eye and said, "Find somewhere else to die, old man." I built that house with my bare hands, paid every bill, raised him on Sunday sermons and sacrifice. Now he called me useless. I left with nothing but 2 suitcases and a prayer. But 3 days later, I sat in my lawyer's office learning that my late wife had left behind something that would flip his world upside down. You don't want to miss what happened next. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. For 40 years, I lived by faith, sweat, and the kind of love that builds homes from nothing but wood, prayer, and stubborn hope. Folks in our town called me Pastor Brooks, but to Marcus I was just Dad, the man who worked 2 jobs and preached on Sundays so he could walk across that college stage. I remember the first time he handed me his diploma. He said, "We made it, Pops." I felt taller that day, like every sleepless night and every bent knee in prayer had been worth it. I watched him grow into the kind of man every father hopes for: sharp suit, polished shoes, a voice that carried confidence. He married a woman from a family with money, folks who lived up in Atlanta and spoke about business like it was scripture. I didn't mind. I thought maybe she'd help him see more of the world. Every Sunday after church, Marcus would drive down in that shiny black Mercedes, his wife Chanel by his side, both of them smelling like success. They'd sit in the same pew Evelyn and I used to sit in before the cancer took her. The congregation adored seeing him back home, the pastor's son turned businessman, living proof that prayer and education could change a generation. But as proud as I was, something in him had started to shift. I'd see it when we'd bow our heads for grace. His lips stayed still. When neighbors spoke about community, he talked about investments. He'd trade in a "praise the Lord" for a "you gotta think bigger." I brushed it off at first. The world was different now, I told myself. Maybe faith just looked different in his hands. After Evelyn passed, the house got too quiet. The walls carried her laughter, but the silence screamed louder. Marcus came by more often, checking in with that polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone out here," he'd say, glancing at the creaking staircase, the old Bible on the table, the framed photo of his mama beside it. "You need something easier to manage. We could find you a nice place in the city, somewhere with people your age." I laughed softly. "You mean a nursing home?" He chuckled, said, I was stubborn, but I saw something flicker behind that laugh. Impatience, maybe, or calculation. He started bringing brochures, glossy pages with photos of smiling seniors playing bingo. "These places got everything, Pops. A pool, a gym, even a choir if you're still into singing hymns." I told him the Lord hadn't retired me yet, but each time he came back his tone grew firmer. "You can't keep living like this," he'd say. I didn't realize he wasn't asking, he was planning. The last time he came, he didn't come alone. Chanel was with him, her perfume arriving in the room before she did. She looked around like she was already redecorating. "Marcus," she said, "your father's been through enough. It's time to handle things properly." Handle things. That phrase crawled under my skin. They stayed for dinner that night. I made Evelyn's fried catfish, the one Marcus used to ask for every Sunday after church. He complimented the food, but his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, toward the framed deed hanging near the door. When they left, I heard them whispering by the car, her voice low and sharp. "He's not going to last much longer, Marcus. You're being too sentimental." I told myself I misheard, but my stomach said otherwise. 2 days later, Marcus showed up again wearing that same cologne Evelyn once bought him for Christmas. He carried a folder in his hand and a look that made the room colder. "Pops," he said, "there's something we need to talk about. It's time to transfer the property. Makes it easier for taxes and all that." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Transfer it to who?" He cleared his throat. "To me. Temporarily. Just until things settle." I felt my jaw tighten. "Your mama and I built this house from prayers and overtime pay. There's nothing temporary about it." He tried to smile, said I was being dramatic. Then he pulled out a paper already stamped, already signed. Except it wasn't my signature. It was my name forged neat as a sermon note. My blood went cold. "Where'd you get that?" I asked. He didn't answer, just looked at me like he was the one being wronged. "You taught me to plan ahead, Pops. This is planning." I could feel the air thickening between us. The son I raised on scripture and sacrifice was standing in my living room using my own lessons against me. I wanted to shout to remind him of the nights I carried him from church asleep in my arms, the mornings I left before sunrise to pay for his school books. But the words froze somewhere between my heart and my throat. Instead, I said quietly, "You may have your mama's face, but you sure don't have her heart." That night I sat on the porch until the stars came out, wondering where I went wrong. The crickets hummed the same way they did when Evelyn used to hum gospel tunes while hanging laundry. I thought about what she'd say if she saw this, our only son, turning on his own blood. She would have told me to pray to forgive, to trust that God sees what men try to hide. So I prayed. But this time the prayer wasn't for Marcus. It was for strength. The next morning I woke up to silence. No birds, no wind, just a feeling heavy enough to bend the air. My phone buzzed Marcus. He'd sent a text, "I'm moving in today. Please have your things packed." No explanation, no apology, just a command. I read it twice before laughing out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief more than humor. Then I started packing. By the time his car pulled up, my suitcases were waiting by the door. He looked surprised, maybe even relieved that I wasn't going to fight. "You're doing the right thing, Pops," he said, patting my shoulder like a pitying stranger. "You'll thank me later." I looked him in the eye. "Son, when a man loses his soul, there's nothing left to thank him for." As I watched his car disappear down the road with everything I owned still inside that house, a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe acceptance. But deep down I felt something else too, a quiet knowing. Evelyn had always been meticulous, the kind of woman who planned for every possibility. I remembered how she spent hours at the lawyer's office before her last surgery saying it was just in case. I'd brushed it off then. Now those words echoed like prophecy. 3 days later I found myself sitting in that same office. The lawyer looked at me over his glasses and said, "Pastor Brooks, your wife left something behind that changes everything." My heart thudded once hard. "What do you mean?" He opened a folder and the air in the room shifted. "It seems your wife predicted what your son might do. She left you full control of all assets, including the house, the savings, and the church fund. She also included a clause about respect. If Marcus failed to honor you, his share would revert entirely to you." I sat there stunned, the room spinning slow like the earth had paused just to watch me breathe again. The same son who told me to get out had just given me back my life without knowing it. I felt Evelyn's presence right then, like she was standing behind me smiling. I didn't say a word for a long time. Then I leaned back and whispered, "The Lord don't sleep." And he didn't. Because what happened next turned my son's world inside out. After the funeral, the house felt like a hollow chest that used to hold a heartbeat. Evelyn's perfume still clung to the curtains, faint and ghostly, like she might walk through the door any minute humming her favorite hymn. That first Sunday without her, I stood in the pulpit and opened my Bible, but no words came. The congregation waited, patient and kind, their eyes full of sympathy. I said a short prayer, closed the book, and dismissed them early. Everyone came by the house that week, neighbors bringing casseroles, church ladies offering prayers. Even the deacon, who rarely smiled, came by with peach cobbler. They all meant well, but grief doesn't like company. It prefers silence. Then Marcus started visiting again more than usual. The first time he brought flowers for his mama's grave and a bottle of bourbon for me. The gesture was nice, but it didn't feel right. He'd never been one for quiet visits. The second time he came with Chanel, both dressed like they were heading to a dinner downtown, she in her silk scarf, he in that tailored jacket that probably cost more than my truck. They stepped inside like the house was a museum they'd just inherited. I caught him glancing at the photographs on the wall our wedding day. Marcus's baptism, the church picnic where he caught his first catfish. He smiled, but it wasn't nostalgia, it was calculation. "Dad," he said, resting his hand on my shoulder like a politician, This house is too big for you now. Let us handle things." His tone was sweet, his words soft, but his eyes were moving, measuring the furniture, the pictures, the piano. I told him I was fine, that the house wasn't too big for me. It was just a little quieter now. He smiled that polite smile again, the kind that looks warm but never reaches the eyes. Chanel wandered through the living room, running her fingers across the wood of Evelyn's piano. "Such beautiful craftsmanship," she said. "You just don't see this kind of quality anymore." Then she turned to Marcus, smiling. "This would look incredible in our foyer, don't you think?" He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched. I noticed. Each visit after that came with a new layer of suggestion. "Dad, you should think about downsizing. You don't need all these bills at your age. That neighborhood's changing. It's not safe anymore." At first I thought he was worried, being a good son, but then the comments started slipping in, small but sharp. "You wouldn't want to be a burden if something happened. The taxes on this place must be a lot for someone on a pension." The words landed heavy, coated with false concern. I'd spent my life reading faces, counseling people who smiled while hiding storms behind their eyes. I recognized that look on him now, the same one I'd seen on men trying to cheat the Lord with a clean conscience. One evening he brought over a man in a navy suit, a real estate consultant, he said. They toured the property like it was up for sale. I followed them through each room, watching this stranger take notes while Marcus nodded along. "It's just an appraisal," Marcus explained, waving his hand. "You never know what opportunities might come up." I asked what kind of opportunities required walking through my wife's sewing room uninvited. He didn't answer. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my chair by the window, the same one Evelyn used to read her Bible in. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I thought about every time she'd warned me that love without humility turns to pride. Marcus had her smile, but none of her grace. Somewhere along the way, ambition had swallowed his soul. The next week he invited me to dinner at their home in Atlanta. I almost didn't go, but part of me still wanted to believe he cared. When I arrived, the house looked like something from a magazine: white walls, glass stairs, not a trace of warmth. Chanel greeted me with air kisses and a glass of wine. Marcus came out of his office talking about long-term investments and liquid assets. I realized then that I wasn't there for dinner, I was there for business. Over steak and silence, he started again. "Dad, you're not getting any younger. I just want to make sure everything's in order." I cut my food slowly, watching him over the rim of my glass. "Everything's been in order since before you were born," I said. He smiled, leaning back. "You're a smart man, but this house could work for you instead of against you. We could rent it, invest the returns, build a portfolio. That's what Mom would have wanted." I put my fork down. "Don't you dare use your mama's name to justify greed," I said quietly. Chanel's phone buzzed. She looked at it, whispered something to him, and left the table. He leaned forward. "Dad, I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want to do what's best for the family." I laughed low, bitter. "You mean what's best for you?" On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying his words. Best for the family. I'd heard men say that when they were ready to betray someone they loved. When I got home, I noticed something strange. The old chest in my study was unlocked. Inside it were family papers, church records, and the deed to the house. The deed was gone. My pulse started pounding. I called Marcus. He didn't answer. The next morning, he showed up with a cup of coffee and that same calm voice. "Relax, Pops. I just took it for safekeeping. You're getting forgetful." He said it like I was already halfway gone, like I was a child again. I told him to put it back. He promised he would, but he didn't. Days passed, and the air between us thickened into something poisonous. He came by less, but called more, each conversation circling back to the same subject: the house, the future control. I stopped answering after a while. The silence was safer. Then one Sunday afternoon after church, Deacon Miller pulled me aside. "Pastor," he said gently, "your son's been asking questions about the church fund. You sure everything's all right?" My stomach dropped. The church fund was Evelyn's legacy, the account she'd set up to help widows and children in the community. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That evening I called Marcus and told him I knew. There was a pause then. That voice, smooth, practiced, almost gentle. You always told me to think of others, Pops. That's what I'm doing. You've done your part. It's my turn to carry the load. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. I stood in the living room surrounded by everything we built, Evelyn's quilts, our photographs, her favorite chair. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in my home. I was standing in his target. Something inside me hardened. I realized Marcus wasn't just circling, he was closing in. His concern was a mask, and I was about to find out just how far he'd go to take what wasn't his. He came back on a Thursday afternoon when the sky was the color of bruised steel and the air smelled like rain. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of cold coffee when his car pulled into the driveway, the same black sedan that used to make me proud, now looking like a hearse for trust. I knew something was off before he even stepped out. The back seat was stacked with cardboard boxes, the kind movers use when they plan to erase a life. Chanel didn't come this time. Maybe she didn't want to see the ending. Marcus walked up the steps holding a folder neat and official. "Dad," he said, his voice careful, almost rehearsed. "We need to get this done today." I looked at those boxes, then at him. "What's all that?" He didn't blink. "It's just time to make the transition smoother. Less stress for everyone." He handed me a stack of papers full of legal words I didn't need a lawyer to understand. The name on the top line was mine. The signature at the bottom was also mine, but I hadn't written it. The lines were too perfect, the strokes too steady. My heart went cold. "You forged this," I said, my voice low. He sighed like a man dealing with a stubborn child. "Dad, don't make this difficult. It's called simplifying. You don't have to worry about the upkeep, the taxes, any of that. I've already handled it." I stood up slowly. "Handled it," I repeated. "You mean you stole it?" He frowned. "Don't be dramatic. You always said the house was for family. Well, now it's under my name for family." I looked at him for a long moment. There was no trace of guilt. He really believed it. "This is my home," I said quietly, steady as a sermon before the storm. "I built it with my hands. Your mama prayed over these walls. Every nail in this place has my sweat in it." He looked away, adjusting his cufflinks like he was late for a meeting. "Dad, you're not seeing the big picture. It's just property. You'll still live here, of course. Nothing's changing." But everything had already changed. Something broke inside me that couldn't be fixed with words or prayer. The boy I raised was gone, replaced by a man who spoke in contracts and smiled like a salesman. I wanted to shout, to throw those papers in his face, but my anger stayed locked behind my ribs, pounding like a drum. I had preached too many sermons about restraint to become the kind of man who lets rage speak for him. Instead, I said, "You did this while I was grieving your mother." He hesitated. "I was protecting what she built." I laughed short and sharp. "You mean what I built? You weren't even alive when I poured the foundation out back. You were still learning to walk when I nailed these walls." He started pacing, his voice rising. "You think I'm the enemy? I'm trying to take care of you. You can't handle this house anymore. You're almost 70, Dad. What happens when you fall? When you forget things, you need to start letting go." Letting go. That's what he called it. Not betrayal, not theft, just letting go. I looked at my son, my blood, my legacy, and realized he was already gone. I turned toward the living room where Evelyn's Bible sat open on the coffee table, the same page she'd left bookmarked before her last hospital visit. Proverbs 22:1. "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches." I wondered if Marcus had ever read that verse, or if he'd traded it long ago for whatever scripture money preaches. The storm outside finally broke, rain hammering against the windows. I stood there listening to the thunder while he kept talking, his words blending with the sound like static. He talked about refinancing tenants' insurance business dressed up as love. I didn't answer. My silence made him uneasy. He shoved his hands in his pockets. I know you're mad, but you'll thank me later. Thank him. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. I walked past him, slow and deliberate, and opened the front door. Take your papers, I said. Take your boxes, too. But leave my house. He hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. Dad, you can't just... I pointed to the rain. Go on. He didn't move. His jaw tightened. You can't live like this forever. You'll regret this. I met his eyes. Son, I've buried my wife, my brothers, and half the men I came up with. There's not much left to regret. He didn't argue after that. He just stood there for a moment, dripping arrogance like cologne, then turned and walked out. I watched his taillights fade through the curtain of rain until the driveway went dark again. That night the house felt heavier than ever. Every creak in the floor sounded like a ghost sighing. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers he'd left behind. His fake signature stared back at me, mocking me with my own name. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them that my son had stolen my home? They'd call it a family matter. I didn't sleep. I sat there until the first light crept through the blinds. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and still. I looked out at the yard, the same yard where Marcus had played with his friends, where Evelyn used to hang laundry on sunny days. I wondered if he remembered any of it, or if those memories were just clutter he'd learned to sell off in his mind. The next morning he came back. No apology, just business. Dad, I moved your things to the guest house out back, he said, like it was a kindness. It's temporary until we figure things out. He'd actually boxed up my clothes, my photos, even Evelyn's quilt. I walked through the hallway and saw the empty walls, the bare shelves where her Bible used to sit. He'd even taken the family portraits down. The home I'd built was stripped of every trace of us, turned into something cold and hollow. He stood behind me, waiting for approval like a landlord showing a tenant around. I turned slowly, feeling the kind of calm that comes right before lightning strikes. You think you've cleaned this place, I said, but you've only emptied it of meaning. There's a difference. He didn't reply. He just left again, his footsteps fading down the porch steps, leaving behind the echo of everything he'd taken. I spent that day packing what little was left. The rain had started again, steady and cold. As I stepped onto the porch with the last box in my arms, I stopped and looked back. The house stood quiet, proud, stubborn, like it refused to let his greed define it. I whispered a short prayer under my breath, not for Marcus, but for myself, for strength, for clarity. Then I walked to the old truck I'd rebuilt years ago with him, when he was still a boy who thought the world of his father. I sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, before driving away. The road shimmered with rain, and somewhere behind me, thunder rolled again, soft, distant, like a warning of what was still to come. And trust me, what came next would make that storm look like a blessing. The rain followed me halfway down the highway, chasing my old pickup like it had a score to settle. By the time I reached the edge of town, the road signs had started to blur through the downpour. The wipers beat a slow rhythm like a tired heart refusing to quit. I passed the glowing cross of Mount Olive Church and thought about stopping there, but I couldn't bring myself to walk through those doors just yet. Not with this shame hanging on me. The pastor who'd preached about forgiveness and faith now looked like a man who'd lost both. I found a motel just off Route 61, the kind with peeling paint and a neon vacancy sign buzzing like an angry fly. The man at the front desk didn't look up from his TV when I slid my driver's license across the counter. $45 a night cash only, he muttered. I handed him 3 20s. He shoved a key across the counter attached to a faded plastic tag that said Room 7. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and lemon cleaner. Inside, the air conditioner groaned louder than the thunder outside, and the light above the bed flickered like it couldn't decide whether to live or die. I sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling it sink under my weight, the springs whining in protest. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling, the kind of room where stories end, not begin. I looked around for something familiar, something to hold on to. And that's when I saw it. An old Gideon Bible on the nightstand. Edges curled, spine cracked. I picked it up, dusted it off, and opened it to a random page. My eyes fell on a verse I'd read 1,000 times, but never felt like I did now. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. I set the Bible down and stared at the ceiling, the plaster stained like storm clouds. My chest felt heavy, not from the air, but from everything I'd carried out of that house. Guilt, anger, grief, and a silence that cut deeper than words ever could. I thought about Evelyn, about how she used to sit at the piano humming gospel songs while I wrote my sermons. Her voice always softened the sharp edges of the world. Now the world felt all edge. Somewhere in the next room a TV was playing an old sitcom laugh track that didn't sound like laughter at all. I walked to the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and caught my reflection in the mirror. Eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, a man trying to hold himself together with faith in fumes. I knelt beside the bed, my knees pressing into the thin carpet, the smell of mildew and rain filling my lungs. I clasped my hands and whispered, "Lord, I've lost everything but my faith. Don't let this be the end of my story." The words broke something open inside me. I started to cry. Not loud, not the kind that needs witnesses, but the quiet kind where your chest shakes and your throat burns, and you pray nobody can hear, because it's not just pain coming out, it's pride. I stayed there until the tears stopped, until my body felt empty enough to breathe again. When I got back up, I noticed the Bible had fallen open to another page, like it wanted to say something else. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. I let out a bitter laugh. "Morning feels a long way off, Lord," I whispered. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw Marcus's face, his calm expression, as he signed away my life with my own name. I wondered if he was sleeping soundly in that house right now, surrounded by everything his mother and I built. Maybe he thought I'd just disappear quietly, that I'd fade into the background like an old photograph left too long in the sun. He didn't know me as well as he thought. Sometime past midnight, the storm stopped. The silence felt unnatural, too sudden, like the world had paused to listen. I got up and stepped outside. The parking lot was soaked, shining under the flickering motel lights. A stray cat darted across the puddles. Somewhere down the road I could hear a train whistle, low, haunting, almost like a hymn. I stood there for a while, letting the cool air wash the motel smell off me, and for the first time that night I felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but a spark. A reminder that even the darkest road still leads somewhere. I went back inside and pulled out my wallet. Inside was a faded photo, Evelyn and me on our wedding day. She was smiling, sunlight bouncing off her veil, and I looked like a man who had the world in his hands. I traced the edges with my thumb. "You always said God don't close one door without cracking a window," I said softly. "I sure hope you were right." Sleep came in fragments after that, dreams of thunder, of the church bell ringing, of Marcus, as a boy handing me a Father's Day card made of blue construction paper that said, "You're my hero, Dad." I woke before dawn, the motel room still dim. The air was cold and my breath fogged in front of me. I sat on the bed and watched the sun try to crawl through the curtains. That's when I noticed a small envelope slipped under the door. No return address, just my name written in looping cursive, Evelyn's handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I hadn't seen her writing since before she passed. I opened it carefully, afraid it might vanish if I breathed too hard. Inside was a folded note and a card from our old lawyer, Harold Bennett. The note said, "Sam, if you're reading this, it means what I feared has come to pass. Go see Harold. He'll explain everything. Remember, God's justice takes its time, but it never fails." I sat there stunned, reading the words over and over until they blurred together. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume. For a moment, it felt like she was sitting beside me again, whispering the plan I hadn't known existed. I looked up toward the ceiling, toward whatever heaven she might be in, and said, "You really didn't trust me to sit still, did you?" When the sun finally broke through the blinds, it hit the Bible on the nightstand, lighting it up like gold. I took it as a sign. I stood, packed my bag, and looked around one last time. The motel room had done its job. It held me in my braking, and now it was time to move. As I walked out into the morning light, the air smelled cleaner, fresher. The sky was still gray, but there was promise in it. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway heading east. The road was open, empty, stretching straight toward whatever waited for me in town. And somewhere deep down I felt Evelyn's hand guiding mine on the wheel. What she left behind was more than love, it was justice waiting to be found. The sun was barely up when I reached town. The streets were still half asleep, the kind of quiet that feels holy. My truck rattled down Main Street past the diner, the barber shop, and the old brick church where I'd preached my first sermon 40 years ago. I pulled up outside Bennett & Associates, the law office tucked between a florist and a pawn shop. The gold letters on the window had faded, but the place hadn't changed much since Evelyn and I sat there years ago planning for what we thought was a faraway future. Harold Bennett was inside, leaning over a stack of papers, reading glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up when I walked in, and for a moment his expression softened the way it used to when we sang in the church choir together. Me on lead, him on harmony. "Sam," he said quietly, standing to shake my hand. "I was wondering when you'd come." That stopped me cold. "You were expecting me." He nodded toward the chair across from his desk. "Evelyn made sure I would be." The sound of her name hit me like a melody I hadn't heard in years. I sat down slowly, feeling the leather creak beneath me. Harold opened a drawer and pulled out a brown envelope sealed and marked with her handwriting, steady, neat, the same script she used when writing birthday cards and grocery lists. My throat tightened. He slid the envelope toward me. "She came to see me about a month before she passed," he said. "Told me not to contact you until she was gone, and until the time was right." I stared at it, afraid to open it, like somehow reading it would make her absence heavier. "What did she say?" "She said you'd need this when the house stopped feeling like a home." That sentence almost took the air out of the room. I sat there silent while Harold unfolded a set of documents. The paper crackled like old hymnal pages. He adjusted his glasses and began to read, his voice calm, even almost reverent. "Evelyn Brooks, being of sound mind, hereby amends her last will and testament." The words rolled out steady, but each one felt like a hammer blow to the coffin Marcus had built around me. She had changed everything. Every asset, every dollar, every inch of land, all transferred to me alone. Marcus's portion existed only under one condition: that he must honor and care for his father with respect and good faith. If he failed, his share would revert entirely to me. I couldn't speak. The office felt smaller somehow, the air thick with the scent of coffee and old wood polish. Harold watched me carefully, like he knew what was coming before I did. "She saw something in him," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "Something she didn't tell me." He sighed. "She loved that boy, but she wasn't blind. Said he'd lost his way. Told me Sam will forgive him, but God's law should have a safeguard. So she wrote one." I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking under me again. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't from shock. It was from the strange rising mix of grief and justice colliding inside me. I looked at Harold. "You mean to tell me that house is still mine?" He smiled, small and knowing. "It never stopped being yours, Sam, legally or spiritually." The words hung in the air, echoing through me. I thought about Marcus walking through those rooms, touching those walls like a king in a kingdom he didn't earn. I thought about him boxing up my life with the same hands that once clung to me during Sunday sermons. And for the first time since Evelyn's funeral, I felt something other than pain. I felt vindicated. Harold handed me another envelope, this one thinner, newer. "These are certified copies of the will and the property documents. I filed them first thing this morning. Marcus will be notified within 48 hours. I nodded slowly, running my fingers over Evelyn's handwriting on the first envelope. She'd thought ahead, planned for the storm she saw coming, and left me the lifeboat I didn't know I'd need. That was her way, always quiet, always 2 steps ahead, the kind of woman who could see the truth before it revealed itself. "She really did all this on her own?" I asked. He smiled. "Sam, your wife didn't believe in losing. She believed in waiting for the right moment to win." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "That sounds like her." Harold leaned forward. You should know Marcus called me last week. He asked about your will, said he wanted to make sure everything was handled. I didn't say much, but I knew what he was up to. Of course he did. I stood sliding the envelope into my jacket pocket. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, tired, yes. But something had shifted. There was fire behind the exhaustion now. Harold walked me to the door. What are you going to do? I turned the doorknob, the bell above the door jingling softly. I'm going home. The word home felt different on my tongue now. Not the house itself, but the truth it stood for. The sweat, the prayers, the promise. Evelyn had seen to it that justice wouldn't come from anger or revenge. It came from wisdom, from patience, from the quiet certainty that wrongs eventually right themselves when the heart stays steady. Outside the air was warmer, the clouds thinning into streaks of gold. I climbed into my truck and sat for a moment, letting the engine hum beneath me. The street was waking up, the florist unlocking her door, a man sweeping the sidewalk, a bus hissing to a stop at the corner. Life moved on, but mine had just turned back. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Evelyn's letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Her words were simple, but they hit harder than any sermon I'd ever preached. Sam, I know you'll try to shoulder everything alone, but some storms aren't meant to be fought, they're meant to reveal. If Marcus ever forgets where he came from, remember where you stand. The Lord keeps the ledgers balanced, even when we can't. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Each line felt like her voice in my ear, soft but unyielding. I wiped a tear I didn't realize had fallen. I started the truck, pulled out onto the road, and headed back toward Cedar Ridge. The same road I'd driven away from 2 nights ago now felt like a road home from exile. The wind through the cracked window carried the faintest hint of magnolia. When I reached the hill overlooking the house, I pulled over. From there I could see it, my house standing quiet, the late morning sun catching the windows. For a moment I imagined Evelyn standing on that porch like she used to, apron tied around her waist, waving me in for dinner. I smiled. You planned it all, didn't you? The breeze picked up warm and certain, as if answering yes. Then I shifted gears, started down the hill, and whispered, time to let him learn what respect really costs. By the time I pulled back into Cedar Ridge, the sun was high enough to burn the dew off the grass. The house stood there proud and silent, like it had been waiting for me. I parked the truck by the fence and took a long look. The blinds were drawn, but I could tell someone was inside. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't need to rush. Justice, I'd learned, moves on its own clock. That afternoon I drove into town and stopped by the courthouse. Harold had already filed the paperwork. The clerk confirmed it with a quiet nod, stamping the documents with a seal that sounded final, like a door closing for good. By sunset, the house, the land, the accounts, every piece of it was legally back in my name. Marcus had no idea the floor was gone beneath him. I didn't go home that night. I wanted him to feel the silence first, to sense the storm before it arrived. I stayed at the church instead, sitting in the dark sanctuary where the only light came from the stained glass. The colors danced across the pews like fire and water. I could almost hear Evelyn's voice again, soft in my ear. You don't have to fight every battle, Sam. Sometimes you just have to stand still and let God work. The next morning the phone started ringing before dawn. Harold called first. He found out, he said. The bank froze his accounts overnight. His wife tried to call me too. I let the words sink in, quiet and steady. Then the papers went through. They did. Every cent. The estate is yours. Marcus's access has been revoked. He'll get the notice by mail this afternoon. Thank you, Harold. You're not planning to go there, are you? He asked. I don't have to, I said, hanging up. But I did drive by. Not to confront him, just to see. The gate was open. Marcus's Mercedes was parked crooked, one tire on the grass. I walked up the driveway, slow, the gravel crunching under my boots. Through the front window I saw him pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and panicked. Chanel sat on the couch, eyes wide, hands clutching her robe. He slammed the phone down so hard it echoed through the glass. I could almost hear his words, even without the sound, something about money lawyers' betrayal. I didn't go in. I just stood there for a minute watching my son unravel inside the home he'd tried to steal. It wasn't pride I felt. It wasn't even anger. It was something deeper, something heavy and clean, like the air after a thunderstorm. I whispered to myself, "The Lord don't sleep." That's when he saw me. He froze. Our eyes met through the glass, his wide with confusion, mine calm, unmoved. He walked toward the window, then stopped, shoulders slumping. I could see the realization hit him. He knew. He opened the door, but for once he didn't speak. The silence between us said everything words never could. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of all that swagger, his fancy watch glinting useless in the morning light. "Dad," he finally said, voice cracking. "What did you do?" "I didn't move. I didn't do anything you didn't start." He swallowed hard. "They froze everything. The accounts, the business. Even the house. It was never yours to take." I said, my tone soft but firm. "You forged my name, boy. You lied to me, lied to God, and thought you could sleep on that." He shook his head, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "I was trying to help." "Help yourself," I cut in. "You dressed it up as care, but greed don't need a disguise. It always shows its face sooner or later." He dropped his gaze. The rain from last night had left puddles in the yard, small mirrors reflecting the two of us, father and son, faith and failure both standing in what used to be home. I turned to leave, but before I did, I said, "You'll get a letter from the lawyer soon. You can still have a piece of what's left if you learn how to earn it." He didn't answer. He just stood there staring at the floor like a boy caught stealing from the collection plate. Chanel came to the doorway, eyes darting between us, sensing the shift in power like an animal sensing a storm. She whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. I walked back to my truck, the gravel crunching softer now, like even the earth knew to be quiet. When I reached the gate, I looked back once more. The house glowed gold in the sunlight, and for the first time it looked alive again. Not his, not mine. Just right. Over the next few weeks, word got around town. Folks at the barber shop talked about it in hushed tones. The deacon at church asked if I'd made peace, and the choir ladies said it was nothing but divine justice. I didn't brag. I didn't correct them either. I just kept showing up to church, kept preaching about grace, about how sometimes God lets the water rise just to show us who can swim. Marcus moved out within a month, sold the Mercedes. Chanel left soon after, taking her jewelry and her silence with her. I heard he found work managing someone else's company, a smaller one where nobody called him boss. I never called to check. Some lessons don't need an audience. They need solitude. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned honey-colored, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The cicadas hummed their evening song, steady and familiar. I looked out over the yard Evelyn once tended, where the rose bushes had bloomed again, stubborn as ever. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the motel, the letter, the justice. It all felt distant now, like a storm I'd already driven through. A car slowed at the gate. For a moment I thought it was him, but it wasn't, just a neighbor waving as he passed. I raised my cup in return and smiled. The road stretched out ahead, quiet and golden in the fading light. Sometimes I still hear Evelyn in the wind, see Sam. The Lord keeps the ledgers balanced. She was right. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me, and whispered to the empty air, "The Lord don't sleep." Then somewhere in that still evening I felt something shift again. Not vengeance, not even triumph. Just peace. But peace never stays still for long. Because the next morning when the phone rang and I heard who was calling, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. By the end of that week, the story had traveled faster than any sermon I'd ever preached. You couldn't sit in a church pew, a barbershop chair, or a diner booth in Cedar Ridge without hearing my name. It started small, the choir ladies whispering after rehearsal, then Deacon Miller bringing it up between hymns. But by Sunday morning, it was gospel Pastor Brooks had been betrayed by his own son, and the Lord himself had set it right. I didn't tell it myself. I didn't have to. Stories like that have their own wings. Old men at the barber shop told it with the rhythm of testimony, shaking their heads slow, saying, "Ain't that something, God don't let his faithful fall." The young ones listened, eyes wide, learning something about patience they wouldn't understand for years. At first I tried to avoid the attention. I kept to my porch sipping my coffee, pretending I didn't notice the folks slowing down as they drove past the house, craning their necks just to get a glimpse. The phone rang nonstop. Some called to check on me, some to say they'd been praying, and a few just wanted to hear the story straight from the source. I gave them all the same answer. The Lord took care of it. That's all that needs saying. By Monday, Sister Green from the church showed up on my porch with a still warm peach cobbler and a hug that nearly cracked my ribs. "You held your peace, Pastor," she said. "You didn't lash out, didn't curse, didn't strike back. And look how the Lord handled it for you." I smiled, though my throat tightened. There's a strange ache that comes from being seen after you've spent months feeling invisible. Then came the parade of casseroles, banana pudding, and pound cakes. The front room filled up like a Sunday potluck. Folks I hadn't seen in years came by, old choir members, deacons, even the mayor who claimed he just happened to be in the neighborhood. They all had something to say about faith, about strength, about how justice finds its way home if you let it. I listened, nodded, thanked them, and kept my words short. But when the last visitor left, I sat in the quiet house and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The community had turned my pain into a kind of parable, and maybe that was fine. But for me, it wasn't about revenge or even redemption. It was about survival, about standing still long enough for God to move. Still, I couldn't help feeling something deeper every time someone knocked on the door with a plate and a prayer. It wasn't pity. It was respect. The kind that can't be bought or begged for. One evening, as the sun melted over the rooftops, I drove down to the barber shop. The bell jingled when I walked in, and every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Then all at once the room filled with greetings. Pastor Brooks. "Good to see you, Reverend. Heard you gave the devil a black eye." This time I laughed and shook my head. "Wasn't me who threw the punch," I said. "That was the Lord's doing." Calvin the barber motioned me into the chair. "Sit down, Pastor. On the house. You earned it." He draped the cape over me, clippers humming in his hand. "You know," he said, "folks been talking about this like it's straight out of Scripture. A father wronged the son, brought low, and the Lord making it right. It's got a rhythm to it." I smiled at my reflection in the mirror. "It's not about rhythm, Calvin. It's about remembering who you are when everything else gets stripped away." He nodded, snipping carefully. "You think he'll come around?" I looked at my own face, older now, lined by more than time. "Maybe," I said. Or maybe the lesson was never for him to begin with. When I left the shop, the night air felt soft and cool, carrying the faint sound of a choir rehearsal from the church down the street. I walked toward it, following the music. Inside, the voices rose in harmony, a song I hadn't heard in years. "His eye is on the sparrow." The choir director saw me and waved me up front. "We saved your seat, Pastor," she said. I sat down quietly, folding my hands as they sang. The voices swelled, filling the sanctuary, wrapping around me like sunlight. I could feel Evelyn in every note. She would have loved this, her community, standing strong, turning heartache into hallelujah. For the first time in months, I let myself sing along. After practice, people gathered around, asking questions, offering more prayers. One young man, barely 20, looked at me with awe. "Pastor, how'd you stay so calm through all that? I'd have lost my mind if it were me." I looked at him and smiled. "You can't fight every battle with your hands, son. Some fights are won by standing still long enough for the truth to walk in." He nodded like he wanted to believe it, but didn't quite yet. I patted his shoulder. "You'll learn. Life teaches slow, but it teaches good." That night when I got home, I found another pie on the porch, still warm under the foil, with a note tucked beneath it. "We're proud of you, Pastor. The neighborhood stands with you." I read it twice before setting it on the counter. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen, and for a moment the house didn't feel empty anymore. The next morning I woke before dawn and stepped outside. The sky was clear, streaked with pink and gold. Birds sang in the oak tree, and the world felt alive again. Across the street, Miss Hattie was watering her garden. She waved, morning reverent. "You preaching this Sunday wouldn't miss it," I called back. As I stood there, coffee steaming in my hand, I realized something: the house wasn't just mine again. It belonged to the community, too. They'd reclaimed it with their love, their food, their faith. The same people who'd whispered behind closed doors about my downfall were now holding me up like a banner of grace. I thought about Marcus. I wondered if he'd heard the rumors yet, if he knew the town had turned his shame into my redemption. Maybe that was its own kind of sermon, the kind life writes when pride finally meets its match. I looked up at the sky, that wide Carolina blue stretching farther than my eyes could see, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for bringing me back home even when I thought I'd lost it all." But as I turned to head inside, the phone rang again, breaking the quiet. The number on the screen made my heart pause. It was his, my son, calling after all this time. 3 days passed before I saw his car again. It wasn't the sleek black Mercedes this time, just an old gray sedan with a missing hubcap and a dent in the side. I watched it crawl up the dirt road like a wounded animal looking for shelter. The air was heavy with that late summer stillness that comes before a storm, and I already knew who was behind the wheel before he even stepped out. Marcus looked smaller, thinner. The crisp shirts and polished shoes were gone, replaced by wrinkled clothes and a face that carried the weight of a man who'd fallen hard. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a long while, head bowed like a sinner about to confess. When he finally looked up, his eyes met mine. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I saw the boy I used to know flicker behind the man he'd become. "Dad," he said, his voice rough. "Can I come in?" I leaned against the doorframe, the wood cool against my hand. Behind me the house was quiet, filled with the kind of peace I'd earned the hard way. I shook my head slowly. "You can pray on the porch if you need to," I said. He blinked, confused at first, then nodded like he understood. He took a step forward, then stopped again. "I don't even know where to start," he said. "Start with the truth," I told him. "That's a good place." He swallowed his hands, fidgeting like a man who'd forgotten what to do with them. "Everything's gone," he said. "The business, the accounts, even Chanel. She left last week. Said she didn't sign up to live without money." I nodded slowly, the way you nod when hearing something you already knew was coming. "You reap what you sow, son. Money bought her love. Losing it took her with it." He looked down at his shoes. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, "No," I cut in gently but firm. "You thought you were smarter than everybody else. Than me, than God. But the Lord's arithmetic don't work that way." The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the yard. Marcus shoved his hands into his pockets. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I can't undo what I did, but I see it now. Everything you said about pride, it's true." I studied him for a long time. He wasn't lying. The arrogance was gone, burned clean by life's fire. But forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you give just to make someone else feel better. It's something you offer when you're ready to live with the peace it leaves behind. "I forgive you," I said finally. His shoulders sagged with relief. "But don't mistake that for forgetting," I added. "Forgiveness don't cancel consequences." He nodded, eyes glassy, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The cicadas filled the silence, their song steady and relentless. I remembered teaching him how to mow this yard when he was 10. He'd hated it, said the sun was too hot. I told him sweat was a blessing, it meant you were earning something. He didn't believe me then. Maybe he did now. "Dad," he said after a while, voice trembling, "is there any way I can make it right?" "Not with words," I said. "You'll have to live your way back to right. And that takes more than time. It takes truth." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I don't even have a place to stay," he whispered. I looked past him toward the road where the church steeple was just visible above the trees. You go talk to Pastor Green over at New Hope. Tell him I sent you. He'll find you some work and a bed for the night. But you earn it. You hear me? You earn it." He nodded, shame written all over his face. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For not turning me away." I looked at him standing there on that porch where his mother once hung flower baskets every spring. "I didn't turn you away, Marcus. You walked yourself out. Now you just have to walk back different." He hesitated like he wanted to say more, then turned toward the steps. His shoes scraped against the wood. When he reached the yard, he stopped again. "You still pray for me?" "Every morning," I said. "But prayer ain't meant to do your work for you." He nodded, eyes low, and walked to the car. The engine sputtered before catching coughing, like it might die any second. As he drove away, I watched the dust rise behind him, curling into the sunset until it disappeared. I stood there for a long while after he was gone, the porch light buzzing above me, moths circling in the glow. My heart felt strange, tired but steady. Evelyn would have been proud of this moment, I think. She always believed a man's real strength shows not in how loud he roars, but in how quiet he can stand when the world expects him to fall apart. Later that night I sat at the kitchen table with my Bible open. The pages were worn corners soft from years of turning. My eyes fell on a verse I'd underlined long ago. "Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other." I whispered it out loud, letting the words fill the room. There was something holy in the silence that followed something that felt like completion. But as I closed the book, I caught a flicker of headlights through the window, someone pulling into the driveway. For a moment I thought maybe Marcus had come back. Maybe he'd forgotten something or just wanted to say goodnight. But as I stepped to the door and looked out, the car wasn't his. The engine idled low, and a figure stepped out carrying a small envelope in one hand. It was the sheriff. He tipped his hat when he saw me. "Evening, Pastor," he said. "Hate to bother you this late, but there's something you ought to see." He handed me the envelope. My name was written across the front in thick black ink. Familiar handwriting, but not Marcus's. As I turned it over in my hands, the sheriff said, "Came into the station this afternoon. Said it's tied to the estate. You might want to read it somewhere private." I thanked him, watched his taillights fade down the road, then looked back at the envelope. The paper was heavy, the kind used for official things. I ran my thumb along the edge, feeling the seal beneath it. Whatever was inside, I knew one thing for sure. My story with Marcus wasn't finished yet. Months passed and the seasons changed like pages turning in a well-worn Bible. The ache that once lived in my chest started to fade, replaced by something steadier, quieter purpose. The house, that old battlefield of pride and pain, no longer felt like a monument to betrayal. It felt like a blank canvas. And one morning, as the sun spilled through the kitchen window, I realized it was time to build something new out of what had been broken. The idea came to me during a Sunday service. The sermon wasn't mine, it was Pastor Green's, and he preached about turning loss into ministry. "You can't heal in the same silence that hurt you," he said, his voice echoing off the rafters. "You've got to fill that space with good." The words struck me like thunder. I walked out of that church knowing exactly what I needed to do. Within a week, I started working. I tore out the cracked floors in the front room, painted the walls a warm cream, and fixed the porch rail that Marcus once leaned on as a boy. I called a few men from the congregation, retired carpenters, electricians, even one young man who'd just come home from the army, and told them my plan. I wanted the house to become a meeting place, a sanctuary for the elders of Cedar Ridge. Somewhere they could gather, pray, and pass on the kind of wisdom that never makes the news, but holds a neighborhood together. The men didn't ask why. They just showed up. Every morning, trucks rolled into the yard carrying lumber paint and old hymn books from the church basement. The sound of hammers and gospel music filled the air. Sometimes the church ladies brought lunch, fried chicken, cornbread, sweet tea. We'd eat on the porch, laughing between bites, the kind of laughter that comes only after grief has been wrung dry. By early autumn, the transformation was complete. The house was no longer mine alone, it belonged to the community. The living room became a prayer circle. The dining room turned into a classroom where older men taught the younger ones about discipline, work, and respect. The back porch became a place for quiet counseling, a spot where broken sons could talk to fathers who'd learned how to forgive without forgetting. And right in the heart of it all, above the mantel, we installed a new, stained glass window. The sunlight hit it just right in the late afternoon, setting the whole room aglow with deep blues, fiery reds, and golden light. At the center was a single image, a dove carrying an olive branch. Beneath it, carved in small letters, were the words, "In memory of Evelyn Brooks, whose faith never faded." The first time I saw it finished, I couldn't move. The colors danced across my hands, soft and trembling. For a moment it felt like she was there beside me, humming her favorite hymn the way she used to when the world got heavy. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in that room looking at what we'd built. The scent of wood polish mixed with the faint sweetness of peach cobbler someone had left on the counter. I thought about how far I'd come from that motel room months ago, the man who had nothing but his faith and a prayer. Now the house was full again, not with possessions or pride, but with people, laughter, and purpose. As I looked up at Evelyn's window, the light shifting through it like liquid fire, I whispered, "The best revenge is living in peace and purpose." The words felt right. True. They weren't born from anger anymore. They came from gratitude. From survival. That's when I heard footsteps on the porch. For a second, I thought it was the wind. But then came a knock, soft, hesitant. I opened the door and found Marcus standing there. His clothes were clean but plain. His face had changed, older, humbled. He held his cap in his hands, turning it nervously. "I heard what you're doing," he said quietly. "At the church they told me about the meetings here, about the food drives, the prayer nights. You built all this." "With help," I said. He nodded slowly, looking past me at the glow from the window. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Mom would have loved it." "She would have," I said. He hesitated, shifting his weight. "I'm working now. Pastor Green got me a job at the hardware store. It's not much, but it's honest." "That's all it needs to be," I said. He looked down at his shoes. "I've been trying to make things right, Dad. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I'm trying." I studied him for a moment. There was no arrogance left in his posture, no false confidence, just a man learning to stand on ground he once scorched. "Trying's a start," I said. "Keep walking that path." He nodded, his voice catching. You think maybe I could come by sometime? Help out with the work here?" I stepped aside just a little, enough for the porch light to spill onto him. "The porch is open to anyone willing to serve," I said. "Same goes for the heart." He smiled, a small, fragile thing, but it was real. "Thank you, Dad." I nodded. "Don't thank me. Thank the one who gave us another chance to get it right." He looked up at the stained glass again, his eyes glistening in the reflection. "Feels like she's still here," he said. "She is," I answered. "In every brick we laid, in every prayer we said, in every person who walks through that door." He lingered for a while before heading back down the steps. When his car disappeared into the distance, I stayed on the porch, the air warm and still. The sound of cicadas rose from the trees, blending with the distant hum of the town settling into evening. I turned back toward the window one last time. The light had dimmed, but the dove still glowed faintly, holding its branch against the dark. It wasn't just glass, it was a promise, a reminder that the kind of victory worth having doesn't come from breaking someone else down. It comes from rebuilding what was lost with faith as your hammer, forgiveness as your nails, and purpose as your foundation. That night I locked the door and stood for a long moment in the quiet. The house didn't echo anymore. It breathed. It lived. And as I walked to my room, I could almost hear Evelyn's voice again, soft and sure, whispering the same truth she always did when the world tried to shake me. "Keep building, Sam. That's how you stay free. And so I did. Life has a way of testing what we're made of through loss, betrayal, and the long road to forgiveness. But Pastor Brooks's story reminds us that true strength isn't found in anger or revenge. It's found in the quiet decision to keep walking in faith when everything else falls apart. Many of us know what it feels like to be overlooked, disrespected, or forgotten by those we've loved and raised. Yet even then, dignity isn't something anyone can take from us. It's something we choose to keep. By turning his pain into purpose, Samuel rebuilt not just his home but his sense of belonging. He showed that healing doesn't come from getting even. It comes from giving back, from using our scars to light the path for others. If you've ever felt wronged or cast aside, remember, peace is the greatest revenge, and purpose is the reward that follows faith. Keep standing tall. Keep believing, and let time reveal its justice. Subscribe for more stories that honor wisdom, dignity, and the power of never giving up. Tell us in the comments, what lesson did this story remind you of in your own life?